Imagine waking up one peaceful morning, certain that everything around you is in order. But in a matter of hours, your life turns upside down. That's exactly what happened to Marcus. It all started with an act of support, helping a woman in trouble on the side of the road. But little did he know that this altruistic attitude, which seemed so simple, would open doors to a series of mysterious and dangerous events. The next day, a black SUV parked in front of his house brought with it the weight of a secret he never imagined carrying. What if, from one moment to the next, you find yourself faced with a choice capable of transforming your life forever? A tempting invitation, filled with promises of change, but with a hidden price. An opportunity to overcome the limitations of a simple life, but which is accompanied by shadows that threaten to swallow your freedom. Marcus finds himself caught between accepting an offer that could change his destiny and protecting what he values most, his integrity. What would you do if you had the chance to change not just your life, but that of an entire community? Accept the money and face the dangers that come with it, or refuse and remain true to your principles, even in the face of powerful threats? It is a story of drama and twists, where each choice carries consequences that may be irreversible. And as Marcus faces this decision, the questions that remain are, how far would you go to protect your freedom? And when the price of change becomes too high to pay? If this story has gripped you, and you want to know how far Marcus will go to protect his freedom, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. Here, each episode brings new twists and difficult decisions that will leave you on the edge of your seat. No miss any detail of this plot full of suspense and mystery.
Hi, this is Jimmy, the channel's writer. He wants to help us acquire more tools to improve our productions. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and check out the other videos on the channel. Embark on this journey with us.
On a hot afternoon in Brooksville, Sarah was on the road, struggling with her car at a standstill. The tire completely deflated. The sun was burning brightly, and she could barely hide her tired expression. When I was already losing hope of getting help, Marcus appeared. That type of person who exudes humility and altruism in every gesture, you know. Without hesitation, he stopped the car, wore a smile, and offered to help. Little did he know that that small gesture of overcoming would be the beginning of a turning point that would change his life forever. The tire was more complicated than it looked, but that didn't discourage Marcus. As he fiddled with the tools, Sarah looked on with a mixture of nervousness and suspicion, but his calm demeanor made her relax. He commented on the hot weather, joked about how it was difficult to find a good workshop in the middle of nowhere, and, little by little, transformed a moment of drama into something lighter. If there's a lesson here, it's that sometimes a simple friendly conversation can change someone's day. And look, sometimes life is like that. A seemingly casual encounter that hides something much bigger. Marcus expected nothing in return. It was just another day, another person in need of help, and he believed that by reaching out, he was only doing right. The kind of thing our grandparents teach us, you know. The importance of being generous, even when no one is looking. He had no idea that this act of altruism would trigger a series of events that would take away his comfortable routine. But as in real life, it is these gestures that, without realizing it, plant the seeds of change. After changing the tire, Sarah, still nervous, tried to pay for the help. Marcus decided, with that sincere smile that only those who are truly humble can give. No need. It was just a help, he said. She insisted, but he remained firm. The truth is that for Marcus, what really mattered was seeing that she was safe, that she could continue her journey. What he didn't know was that, at that moment, he was planting something bigger, something that would shake his certainties. Sarah, finally back in the car, thanked him with shining eyes. And it wasn't just because of his kindness. There was something more there, something Marcus couldn't decipher at the time. Maybe it was the breakup of a difficult day that was ending better than it started, or maybe it was a secret she didn't feel ready to share. But he let it go, after all. Everyone has their battles, and that's how he got back to his car, without imagining that thank you held a mystery that destiny would reveal very soon. That night, Marcus returned home, feeling good that he had done something good. Simple things, like knowing someone could get home safely thanks to him. It was the kind of thing he always did, without expecting anything in return. As he prepared his dinner, he remembered the peaceful life he had in Brooksville, where everyone knew everyone and no one cared about helping anyone else. But something, in the back of his mind, would remind him of Sarah's look. Something there seemed out of place, but he convinced himself it was all in his head. Little did Marcus know that that night would be the last before his routine was turned upside down. When awoken the next day, the sky was cloudy, as if foreshadowing the events to come. He had no idea that a simple holding gesture would bring something so unusual to his door. As soon as he opened the curtain, he saw a black car parked on the corner of his street. It wasn't just any car. It was a black SUV. One of those that seem like they want to go unnoticed, but that, in fact, attract even more attention. Marcus didn't think much about it, at least not right away. He continued his day, trying to ignore that weird feeling that was lingering around him. But as they say, when a tug sets in behind your ear, it's hard to ignore. The SUV remained there, motionless, like a mysterious shadow. What could it mean? Marcus began to wonder, but at the same time, he tried to push away paranoid thoughts. After all, he was always a man of principles, of overcoming, and who believed in the good in people. But would this philosophy of life be tested soon? As the hours passed, Marcus discovered that the car wasn't just a parcel. No one in the city drove a vehicle like that, and it began to weigh on his thoughts. Something told him that help on the road hadn't been as simple as he thought. But once again, he tried to push the idea aside, seeking refuge in everyday things, tidying the house, taking care of the garden, calling an old friend. Still, that presence remained there, like a harbinger that something was about to change. It was almost as if the universe was setting the stage for an upheaval. And that's when the story starts to take a different turn. Marcus didn't know it yet, but the help that this discovery offered would transform his calm days into a true drama of mystery and suspense. The shadow of that SUV, standing on the corner, was not just a car, but the beginning of a series of events that would challenge everything he believed. Something was about to happen, something that would take him out of his comfort zone in ways he never imagined. The next morning, Marcus agreed early as usual, the aroma of coffee filling a small kitchen as he looked out the window. But something on the horizon caught his attention, a dark spot that hadn't been there the day before. A black SUV, parked on the corner of his street. There wasn't much activity in Brooksville, so anything out of the ordinary quickly stood out. He thought maybe it was just a car belonging to someone visiting a neighbor. However, a feeling that something was out of place began to throb in his mind. Marcus tried not to worry about his routine, but the presence of the SUV never left his mind. Every time he peeked out the window, there he was, motionless, like a black statue that silently watched his house. And do you know when you feel like you are being present? That was exactly how he felt. A shiver ran down his back, as if he had become heavier. He even tried to convince himself that it was just paranoia, but the discomfort wouldn't go away. Overcoming fear has never been easy, especially when it comes without explanation. The SUV sat there all day, and as the sun went down, Marcus' anxiety increased. He began to wonder if Sarah had something to do with it. After all, who was she really? And why was a car that clearly didn't go to town parked on his street, right after he had helped a stranger? These questions tormented him, but he knew he wouldn't have easy answers. He didn't want to involve the police without better understanding the situation, but the idea of confronting the SUV's occupants also seemed too risky. That night, Marcus could barely sleep. Every sound from the street seemed amplified by the tension. When he finally fell asleep, it was only to wake up from a strange dream where shadows followed him through dark alleys. He woke up sweaty, his heart racing, and went to the window. There was the SUV, a dark silhouette against the dim glow of the streetlights. It was as if the car was waiting for something, or someone. The quiet life of Brooksville now seemed far away, and he felt like he was about to be plunged into a drama he hadn't asked for. The next day, the SUV was still there, but this time, Marcus noticed a detail that he hadn't noticed before. The windows were all tinted, making it impossible to see who was inside. The feeling that there was something hidden there was disturbing. "What do you want from me?" he thought. Maybe it would be better to ignore it, get on with life. But at the same time, ignoring that presence was like trying to ignore an elephant in the room. With each passing hour, the need to understand what was happening intensified. When I finally decided to go out to look for answers, a sense of acceptance mixed with the courage of someone who has already overcome so many challenges guided him. He walked toward the car, each step heavier than the last, until, when he was a few feet away, the SUV's engine purred, breaking the silence of the street. The car reversed and went slowly, disappearing around the bend. Marcus stood still, watching the trail the taillights left. That attitude only confirmed his suspicions. It wasn't a simple coincidence. Upon returning home, feeling the weight of doubts pressing down on your chest, who was in that car? Why such specific looks when observing him? It was a turn of events he hadn't expected in his simple life. At night, as he looked up at the ceiling in his room, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. Should I have taken that money from Sarah? He asked himself, feeling the drama intensify in his mind. And with that, a new emergency question. How to deal with the stranger who knocked on your door. Over the next few days, the SUV mysteriously appeared and disappeared. Sometimes it was there first thing in the morning. Other times it was only there at night. It was as if he was waiting for the right moment. Marcus began to notice the looks of his neighbors, who noticed his uneasiness. "Are you okay, Marcus?" one of them once asked. He just nodded, trying to stay calm. But it was difficult to ignore the discomfort of being watched, even without understanding why. It was one of those moments where you feel like you're in a thriller movie. Only this time, he was the protagonist. That night, Marcus decided to take his car and drive around town, hoping to strip the SUV if he decided to follow him. He traveled through narrow streets, crossed avenues, passed through the busiest places in Brooksville. But when he returned home, the SUV was there, as if it had never left. "Am I going crazy?" he thought, as he entered the garage. But deep down, he knew the situation was far from simple paranoia. Something real was happening, and the life he knew was slowly falling apart. And while trying to fit the pieces of this puzzle together, Marcus had no idea that that feeling of insecurity was just beginning. The SUV might have been a mystery, but he knew the car wasn't there by chance. He felt that an explanation, however uncomfortable it was approaching. What he didn't yet know was that this enigma would turn into something much bigger. When Sarah's past and the Montgomery secrets began knocking on his door, offering promises that were too good to be true. That morning, while Marcus was drinking his coffee, a different car moved away from his house. It wasn't the SUV, but still, his heart sank when he saw two men in suits getting out of a shiny black sedan. They walked towards the front door, with a posture that exuded authority. The feeling that something was about to happen was like a punch in the stomach. He took a deep breath, opened the door, and prepared himself for what came next. I didn't know who they were, but the look in their eyes already said that they weren't there for a casual conversation about the weather. "Good morning, Mr. Marcus," said one of the men, with a smile that seemed rehearsed. "We are representatives of the Montgomery family." Marcus frowned when he heard that name. He had no idea who it was, but something he knew was connected to Sarah. "We would like to talk about what happened that night when you helped our cousin, Sarah Montgomery." Her name fell like a stone in his mind. Everything started to make sense, but the question was, why was such a powerful family worried about a simple act of holding? They didn't take long to get straight to the point, presenting an envelope stuffed with an offer. "We really appreciate what you did for Sarah, and we would like to repay your kindness," said the older man, holding out the envelope with a slight nod of his head. Marcus looked at it strangely, as if the weight of that paper was heavier than it seemed. Inside the envelope was a check, but it was no check. The amount was enough to change the life of anyone in Brooksville. And there he was, standing still, trying to process what it really meant. Marcus hesitated to accept. As tempting as the offer was, something didn't smell right. Why so much generosity for such simple help? He said, trying to hide his distrust. The younger man, who until then had been silent, stepped forward. "The Montgomery family values altruism, Mr. Marcus. We want to ensure that people like you are rewarded. But his smile didn't convince Marcus. He had seen this type of expression before. It seemed more like a negotiation than a simple thank you. Marcus looked at the check and, for a moment, thought about everything that money could change in his life. He could renovate his house, help his friends in Brooksville, even make some dreams he had kept in a drawer come true. But there was something in the attitude of these men that made him suspicious. That proposal was like a gift wrapped in mystery. He knew he would accept more than just pocket money. It was a crossroads, a point of no return, and he wasn't ready to cross that line without knowing where it would lead. He decided to ask for some time to think, but before he could close the door, the older of the two placed a firm hand on his shoulder. The Montgomery family always knows how to recognize a debt of gratitude, but I hope you understand that this is an opportunity that doesn't come along every day. The words were spoken with a polite tone, but the pressure behind them was unmistakable. Marcus nodded, trying not to show that he was shaken, and at that moment, it became clear that, behind the apparently generous gesture, there was a veiled expectation. When the men left, Marcus closed the door and felt the weight of the offer in his hands. He left the envelope on the table and looked surprisingly, as if he could reveal all of Montgomery's secrets. He knew that accepting would involve something much bigger than he could see. He felt the urge to tear up the check and end it right there, but something inside him also said that this decision needed time reflection, because deep down, he knew he was being tested, and that the consequences could be deeper than a simple no. Marcus spent the next few days reflecting on the offer, trying to make some sense of the whole situation. Why would someone so powerful care so much about a simple help on any given night? It was as if the universe was playing with him, putting him in front of a choice that could change everything. And what's worse, he felt like he didn't have all the pieces of the puzzle. With each new thought, the feeling that there was something bigger hiding in the shadows only increased. That check seemed more like an invitation to a world he didn't know and didn't want to know. When talking about it with some close friends, Marcus realized that everyone had different opinions. "Accept it, man. This is like big," one of them joked, not understanding the depth of the dilemma. But others, like his old friend Clara, said he should listen to his heart. "There is no gift without a price, Marcus. Be careful not to sell your piece for a banknote overdraft," she warned, with the wisdom of someone who had already seen a lot in life. And so, the days are passing, and the decision has become increasingly difficult. With each passing day, Marcus felt more pressure. He knew that the decision could not be postponed forever, but a doubt gnawed at his insides. And somehow he felt like the Montgomerys knew that. It was as if they were waiting for him to reach his limit, for him to give in to the attempt. He didn't know it yet, but the visit to those men and the generous offer were just the tip of the iceberg. With each step he took toward his decision, he got closer to discovering the true secrets behind Sarah's story, secrets that could change his life forever. After the Montgomery family representatives left, Marcus found himself in a whirlwind of thoughts. The offer was still on the kitchen table, like an unrefusable invitation that seemed to mock his hesitation. He ran his fingers over the paper, typing the symbolic weight of that check. It was as if life was giving him the chance to take a leap. But a leap to where? He remembered Claire's words, "There is no gift without price." The problem is that, as much as I wanted to ignore it, the desire to change my life began to creep in like a sneaky shadow. Marcus decided to seek advice from those he trusted most. He called his longtime friend, Derek, for a talk on the porch of his house. Derek was the kind of friend who spoke bluntly, and when he saw the check, he let out an incredulous laugh. "You're crazy not to accept it, man. It's easy money," he exclaimed, but we soon discovered that the matter was more serious than it seemed. Marcus, in a thoughtful tone, thinks about his worries. What if this money has a hidden price? Something I can't pay for with integrity? The answer came quickly, but full of uncertainty. Sometimes, we only discover the truth when we take risks. The conversations didn't stop there. Marcus also met his sister, Angela, someone who always had a critical eye on the world. She was practical, direct, and when she heard the story, she didn't hesitate to express her concerns. These people don't offer that much money for nothing. If they are being generous, it is because we expect something in return. Be careful, Marcus, not to get into a debt you didn't ask for. Her speech resonated in his mind like an echo. The truth is, he knew Angela was right. That amount of money felt like a weight on his conscience, like a dilemma that couldn't be resolved with a simple answer. But it wasn't just harsh words that Marcus had to deal with. He also remembers all the opportunities that check could bring into his life. He looked at the simple house he had inherited from his parents, at the renovations he always postponed, at the bills that insisted on arriving. With this money, I could help my community, create a better future for the children here, he thought. It was an inspiring thought, one that touched his heart, but at the same time, he knew that accepting the offer would completely change the course of his life, and perhaps he would lose control over his choices. One cold night, Marcus sat on the porch and looked up at the starry sky, searching for answers. The stars have always been a refuge, a reminder that there are things greater than us. But on that night, not even they are fair to have the answers he was looking for. He knew he was living a personal drama, a conflict that planned not only courage, but wisdom. Is it possible to maintain my integrity and accept the Montgomerys' help? He asked himself, as he felt the cold wind touch his face. The decision seemed to be a test, a challenge that tested everything he believed in. Marcus, however, could not ignore the urgency that the situation brought. Each day that passed, he felt the Montgomerys' invisible gaze weighing down on him. The feeling of being watched no longer came only from the parked SUV, but from the very air that surrounded it. And with each new morning, the dilemma became harder to ignore. He thought about how distant the quiet life of Brooksville seemed now, as if he was already in another reality, where the simple act of making a decision could determine the rumor of his existence. It was a turn of events he never expected to face. When in doubt, he decided to do something that had always brought him peace. Visit the local church and talk to the priest. I don't know what to do. I feel like any decision I make will change me in ways I can't control, he said. The priest, in his calm voice, reminded him of a passage about choices and consequences. Sometimes the right path is not the easiest, but it is what keeps us safe in who we are. Reflect on what your heart wants and what it fears losing. The words touched Marcus, but did not dispel the clouds of uncertainty. They only made him question even more what he was willing to risk. The nights passed a stage of insomnia and doubts, where Marcus went over all the possible scenarios. What if he accepted and was drawn into a world he didn't understand? What if you refused and missed the chance to transform your life and the lives of others? It was a drama without a defined script, where he could only follow his intuition. Every glance at the check on the table was a reminder of what was at stake, and at the same time, an invitation to reflect on what really matters in life, maintaining simplicity and peace or risking everything for the promise of a better future. In a moment of desperation, Marcus almost picked up the phone to call Montgomery and accepted the offer. But something made him stop, an instinct that told him that, before making any decision, he necessarily understood more about Sarah and the secrets she carried. It was then that I decided that, before accepting anything, I would first know what was behind the whole story. After all, no one appears in your life and offers you a fortune for no reason. He knew he needed to find answers to the questions that tormented him, and that would take him on an even deeper path. And so, with his mind full of uncertainty, Marcus prepared to look for Sarah and demanded answers. The check remained there, like an attempt that he couldn't just ignore. But now, more than the offer, he necessarily understood the reason for it all. He knew he was facing a turning point, where Sarah's past and the Montgomerys' wishes were mixed into a puzzle that he would necessarily unravel. He just didn't imagine that, by seeking these answers, he would be approaching a secret that could put his life at risk, something that would forever change the way he saw the world. When Marcus decided he needed answers, he didn't know where to start. But the image of Sarah, so vulnerable at night on the road, never left his mind. Something about it didn't add up, and he felt the key to understanding the Montgomerys was finding out more about her. After some contacts and discreet conversations around the city, he managed to find out where Sarah was staying. It was a simple hotel, far from the center, as if she was trying to go unnoticed. Marcus, with a determination that not even he knew he had, went there, trying to understand what had really happened that night. When Sarah opened the bedroom door, her gaze revealed a deep tiredness, as if she was carrying a burden greater than anyone could imagine. Marcus walked in, feeling the tension in the air. He didn't waste time beating around the bush. I need to understand what is happening. Who are the Montgomerys really? And why has that SUV been following me since I helped you? The question echoed in the small room, and Sarah beneath her eyes, as if she was seeking the strength to tell the truth. That moment, he knew, would be the watershed between what he believed to be his reality and a new world full of secrets and danger. Sarah finally lost her gaze and began to speak. His voice was fragile, but truly conveyed. I was running away, Marcus. Not of a place, but of people. People who want to use my family's power for their own ends. She explained that her father, Richard Montgomery, was an influential businessman, but his connections attracted powerful enemies. And that night he met her on the road. She was escaping a kidnapping, a plan that would use her as a bargaining chip. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The help he provided, once seen as a simple act of holding back, now seemed like a crucial piece in a game he didn't understand. Marcus was silent for a moment, taking in everything Sarah had here. The drama of that situation became even more real. He told himself how a simple man from Brooksville got involved in something so big. But as I listened to Sarah's words, a new understanding surged. They offered me a check, Sarah. Do you want to buy me to have helped? She agreed, but her look was deeper than simple confirmation. They don't just want to reward you, Marcus. They want to make sure you don't talk about what you know. My father would do anything to protect the family name, even if it means keeping you around. The revelation fell like a bomb in Marcus' world. He saw that this generous offer was not just a thank you, but a way of keeping control over him. The dilemma of accepting the money now seemed even more dangerous. So, am I a threat to them? He asked, trying to understand the scale of the situation. Sarah hesitated before answering. Not exactly, but you are an outlier. Someone who knows more than you should. And in my father's mind, it's better that you're under the protection of your family than free out there, with the possibility of telling what you saw. Marcus felt a knot forming in his chest. The image of the Montgomerys changed completely. It was not just a rich family, but a force that manipulated situations in its favor, keeping everyone around it under surveillance. He remembered the SUV that followed him, the men in suits who pressured him, and how that check felt more like a chain than a gift. Sarah continued, her voice now filled with a tone of urgency. I didn't want to involve you, Marcus, but I was desperate, and you were the only person who reached out to me when I needed it most. Her words carried a raw truth, and Marcus began to understand that this was more complex than he imagined. Sarah then revealed details about the family's enemies, people who used every weapon possible to try to target her father. They wanted to use me as a way to get to him, and when you helped me, without even knowing it, you cut their plan short. That's why they came to follow you, to offer you things. They know you're a variable they can't control. Marcus, who had always been just an ordinary man, now found himself a piece in a dangerous game. The idea that his selfless gesture had triggered all of this left him confused and filled with fear for what was yet to come. Hearing all that, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility. He has always lived a simple life, based on helping others without expecting anything in return. But now he found himself in a position where his help had created a domineering effect, affecting people and interests much larger than himself. So what's my choice here, Sarah? Can I accept the money and submit to them or refuse and be exposed? Sarah lowered her head, as if she regretted having to tell the truth. I don't know, Marcus. I just know that none of the options are easy. But I need you to know, to understand what's really in the game. Marcus looked at Sarah and saw someone who, like him, was in a desperate fight to survive. There was something tragic in her story, but also a strength of resilience that he couldn't ignore. They were united by an invisible thread, sewn together by fate that night on the road. He knew that from that moment on, his life was intertwined with hers and Montgomery's secrets. But a new question began to grow in his mind. Should he just run away and leave everything behind? Or should he face what was coming, even without knowing where it could lead him? As they talked, Marcus realized he had reached the point of no return. I could no longer ignore what I knew, but I also didn't want to be a pawn in a powerful family's game. He left the hotel with a feeling of uneasiness, knowing that when he returned home he would face an even more difficult decision than before. And now, with Sarah's revelation, he understood that what was at stake was more than money or power. It was the very freedom to choose his future. The night seemed darker than ever, and the path he would take from there was filled with uncertainties and risks that could change everything forever. Back at his home, Marcus felt the weight of every word Sarah had here. He spent hours pacing back and forth, with the check still on the table, and the windows open, letting in the cold night air. He knew he was faced with a choice that would shape the rest of his life. Montgomery's offer was tempting, promising an easier future, but he couldn't shake the feeling that, by accepting, he would be giving up something essential: his independence, his integrity. Is it worth paying that price? He asked himself, feeling the dilemma gnawing at every bit of his peace. Doubt was mixed with the desire to overcome, to finally leave the simple and limited life of Brooksville. He thought about the bills he could pay, the improvements he could make to his home, even the dreams he never had the courage to pursue. The promise of a better life seemed to be there, within reach, like a light shining at the end of the tunnel. But there was a shadow, the shadow of losing its essence, of becoming a manipulable piece in Montgomery's hands. Marcus found himself in an internal tug-of-war, where each side pulled with almost irresistible force. He remembered Sarah's words, "Don't let them control your life," that reverberated in his mind as wise advice. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore the possibility of using that help to do good. Marcus was always driven by the desire to help his community, to be an example of altruism for the children of Brooksville, who they admired for his simplicity. With Montgomery's resources, he could make that dream a reality. But at the same time, he knew that once he accepted, the control would no longer be his. The sleepless nights continued, and time seemed to drag by as Marcus searched for an answer. He thought about all the decisions that had been made throughout his life, always guided by honesty and humility, without becoming attempts at the easiest path. And now, faced with such a complex choice, he wondered if he was being too stubborn, if it was time to give in, to accept that not all battles can be won without help. But something in his heart said that it wasn't just about him. It was about maintaining his dignity, about not giving up the principles that had defined him until then. During these nights of reflection, Marcus returned to visit the old porch of his house, where he had so often found answers to his dilemmas. He watched the distant lights of the city, while the wind blew, bringing a cold that seemed to cut the skin. That's when a memory of his father surfaced, advice he often gave when Marcus was young. "Never sell your soul, my son. Life has a way of giving back everything you give." Those words, simple but profound, awakened something in him. Would this be the right decision? To refuse the offer, even if it meant giving up a unique chance? But Marcus couldn't just ignore what he had to gain. The Montgomery's money could be an answer to many of his community's hardships. It could build a better future for those he loved. He envisioned a new community center, scholarships for young people, and even assistance programs for the most caring families. The idea of doing something great filled him with hope, but the shadow of a hidden price remained there, reminding him that for every step toward this new future, there was a personal sacrifice he would need to make. In the midst of this internal drama, he found himself thinking, what if this is all a test of character, to see how far I am capable of maintaining my values, even when the effort is great? The doubt remained, but he also knew that he could not wait for a divine answer. It was a choice he would need to make on his own, based on what he believed was right. He will see that regardless of the decision, it would have consequences, and that he could not go back after taking the next step. One morning he decided to take the check and look at it one last time. I thought about tearing it up, but I stopped, feeling the weight of the responsibility that it carried. He put the envelope back in his pocket and walked through town, stopping in front of the abandoned lot where he dreamed of building a community center. There, he hid himself on the hood of his car and tried to imagine the future. Accepting the money means taking this step, he thought. But at what cost? He stood there for hours, feeling the wind, watching the children playing along, and realizing that the decision was more difficult than he could ever imagine. When I returned home, I found a letter from Sarah in the mailbox. She thanks him for everything and apologizes for involving Marcus in her story. She said she understood whatever choice he made, but that if he needed support, she would be there to help him face whatever came his way. Marcus read those words with a mixture of collapse and sadness. Now he knew he wasn't alone, but that didn't make the choice any easier either. The Montgomerys' offer continued to hover over his head, like a cloud about to collapse. And it was then, in that moment of absolute silence, that Marcus understood that he could not escape what was coming. The decision was made in front of you, waiting to be made. It could mean entering a world he barely understands, but with the chance to transform lives. Declining, on the other hand, kept his peace of mind, but left behind an opportunity that might never come again. Marcus knew the answer was within him, but he would need more time to find it. He just didn't imagine that what would come next would change his destiny in a way he could never predict. Marcus spent the next few days in a state of uncertainty. But one thing was certain. The choice he made would define his path from now on. He knew that accepting the Montgomerys' money took a step into the unknown, a world where power and influence were the currency of exchange. But the idea of using these resources for something bigger, to help his community and improve the lives of those around him, still beat strong in his heart. Every thought seemed to be a clash between the attempt to change your life and the fear of losing your essence in the process. In a moment of desperation, he arrived at an old lookout on the outskirts of Brooksville, a place he often went to think in times of crisis. There, he felt the cold wind hitting his face, as if nature was trying to give him a push in the right direction. He closed his eyes and tried to visualize the future, one where he accepted the offer and turned the city into a better place, but where the price to pay could be his freedom, and another where he refused, continuing the simple life he had always known, but without the chance to create a lasting impact. The pressure doesn't just come from within. The Montgomerys' calls became more frequent, and the men in suits showed up at his house again, as if to remind him that the offer was on. "We just want to help," they said with their polite smiles. But Marcus saw through the words. He knew that as altruistic as the offer seemed, there was something more to the game. "Are you sure you don't want to reconsider?" she insisted, and he felt the weight of the power they wielded, an influence that could easily turn into pressure. That same week, while walking through the city, Marcus was approached by some children he knew well. "Mr. Marcus, you always say that we have to believe in our dreams, right?" said a girl, with an innocent smile that made his heart sink. He saw that, in the eyes of those young people, he was an example of resilience and overcoming, someone who always fought with what he had. And at that moment, he understood that any decision he made would not only affect his life, but also the way everyone around him would see him. It was a responsibility he could not ignore. On a particularly cold night, Marcus decided to revisit the place where he grew up, a house he inherited from his parents, which represented all his roots and the simplicity he always valued. He walked through the old yard, touched the trees that his father planted, remembering all the teachings about honesty and humility he received. He felt that, in a way, that decision was like saying goodbye to a part of himself. Refusing the money was supposed to keep everything as it was, but he also knew that time brings change, and that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. When I returned home, I found a letter from Sarah on her door. She wrote simply but with a tone of urgency. "Marcus, I know you are facing a difficult choice. I just wanted to know that whatever path you choose, I will be here to support you. But I also want you to understand that my father never gives up on getting what he wants. Be prepared." Those words brought a new weight to his mind. He knew that the Montgomerys would not stop insisting, but perhaps there was a way to find a balance, to accept help without losing their freedom. The next morning, Marcus decided it was time to have a face-to-face conversation with Montgomery's representatives. He invited the two to meet at his own home, a space where he still felt in control, away from the eyes of the streets and the mysterious SUV. When the men arrived, Marcus couldn't hold back. "I accept talking about the offer, but I want it to be clear. I am not a pawn in your game. If I accept, they will be on my terms." The firm tone of his voice surprised the men, but he knew it was the only way to maintain some power over the situation. The Montgomerys listened to his judgments with a calculated expression, but there was evident interest in their eyes. "We are interested in discussing the details, Mr. Marcus," "We can reach an agreement that benefits both parties," replied one of the men, with a smile that Marcus didn't know if it was genuine or a mask. He felt he was entering dangerous territory, but the chance to use these resources to build something positive was too tempting to ignore. Maybe, just maybe, he could negotiate without losing his essence, without being swallowed by the power of the Montgomerys. After that conversation, Marcus spent days reflecting on the details of what a possible agreement would be. He shared that if he accepted, the money would go directly to community projects, no personal wealth, no luxuries. Everything would be transparent, with every penny going toward improving Brooksville and creating opportunities for the children and youth he valued so much. It was a way of keeping his altruism intact, of making his help count without giving up the values that defined him. But he knew that even with these conditions, there were still risks. After all, the Montgomerys weren't known for accepting no easily. With every detail of the plan drawn up in his mind, Marcus felt that he was approaching the moment of final decision. He knew that once he took this next step, he couldn't go back. Choosing to accept Montgomery's help with his own rules could be a path to overcoming, but it could also be the beginning of a new form of control over his life. And as he prepared to give a definitive answer, he had no idea that what was coming would challenge him in ways he never imagined. One last test awaited him, and his decision would be put to the test in front of the real interested parties who were hiding in the shadows of the Montgomerys. The morning Marcus decided to give his answer arrived with a cloudy sky, an omen that things would not be simple. He arranged to meet the Montgomery representatives at the local coffee shop, a place he knew well, where every noise from the counter and every curious glance from the customers was part of a familiar scene. When the two men arrived, tension was in the air. Marcus felt it was time to establish his conditions, to define how that agreement should be made, so that he didn't lose the essence of who he was. "I have some conditions," Marcus began, his voice firm and his eyes fixed on theirs. "If I accept the money, it will go directly to building a community center here in Brooksville. I want every penny to be transparent, and for the young people of this city to have access to a better future." The men in suits looked at each other, visibly surprised by Marcus' stance. One of them offered in a restrained way, trying to hide the tension that took over the conversation. "The Montgomery family is willing to support this, but we need to make sure there is an understanding between us." Marcus knew that every word spoken in that meeting was a step into the unknown. The men, always so polite, now showed a little more nervousness. It was as if they were losing control of the situation they had lost control of. "Understood, Marcus," one of them said in a serious tone. "Accepting this offer means you will be in the eyes of our family. Our help comes at a price, and we want you to be aware of that." Marcus felt his blood run cold. That sentence, said with a smile on his face, sounded like a veiled threat, something that made him question even more the interest behind that supposed generosity. But Marcus was not intimidated. He took a deep breath and maintained his posture, aware that he could not show weakness at that moment. "If that's how it needs to be, then so be it. But I make it clear that I would not be a puppet. If you want my silence, you have to give me the freedom to act my way." Those words echo throughout the cafe, as if each syllable carries the weight of his decision. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to pay the price if it meant preserving his integrity. The men's expression indicated that they were reluctant but particular about keeping up appearances. After the conversation, Marcus left the cafe with a mix of problems and uneasiness. He had set his rules, but something told him that things wouldn't end there. He knew that the Montgomerys' power was like a shadow that could fall over his life, covering his steps with every decision he made. But at the same time, he felt like he had gained a small piece of freedom. "I'm not going to let myself be controlled," I thought to myself, as I looked up at the cloudy sky and felt the cold wind cross my face. But that trust would be tested in ways he didn't expect. Upon returning home, Marcus found Sarah waiting for him on the porch, her worried gaze fixed on the horizon. She knew he had been met with his family representatives, and the tension was written all over his face. "They will not accept these conditions easily, Marcus. My father never gives in when he thinks he can win," she said, her voice carrying fear. He tried to reassure her, saying that he was prepared to deal with whatever came his way. But deep down, He also knew that he had entered into a dangerous game, where every move needed to be calculated. Sarah decided that she could no longer sit idly by and revealed to Marcus something that she had kept secret until then. "There are records, Marcus. Documents about my family's businesses, transactions they would never want to see come to light. I didn't want to involve you any more than I already am. But this could be our ace in the hole if they try to pressure you." Marcus was stunned by the revelation. This was more than he had imagined, and suddenly, the risk became even more palpable. He found himself faced with a new choice. Use this information to protect himself, or try to keep everything within the limits that were proposed. The following nights were a whirlwind of thoughts. Marcus knew that Sarah's decision to reveal the family's secrets could be what he needed to secure his freedom. But I also knew that this would cross a dangerous line, where the consequences could be irreversible. He wondered if he was willing to face the wrath of such a powerful family, if it was worth taking that risk in the name of his integrity. Sometimes courage is not about facing danger head-on, but rather about knowing when to recover and when to fight, he thought, trying to find some comfort in his own reflections. Sarah and Marcus spent time working together, analyzing the documents and trying to understand how we could use them strategically. They knew they were treading mined ground, but each night of work brought a new sense of closeness and mutual trust. The fear was still present, but now it was shared. Marcus began to realize that, even though he had entered this situation alone, he didn't need to face it without support. And this partnership, so unexpected, gave him new strength to move forward, even though he knew that the final confrontation was approaching. But as they analyzed every detail, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. The Montgomerys were not the type to leave matters unresolved, and he knew that the momentary tranquility would not last forever. He felt like he was preparing for a storm, where every move could be decisive. The tension grew every day, and the shadows that surrounded his life now grew even denser. What Marcus didn't know was that the real clash was about to happen, and he would need all his courage and cunning to uncover the secrets that the Montgomerys were certain to keep hidden. The tension was in the air like a taut rope about to snap, and Marcus felt the final confrontation getting closer and closer. He woke up that morning with a nagging feeling, as if he knew something was going to happen, and it didn't take long for his suspicions to be confirmed. A letter was left in his mailbox, unsent but with a clear message. "We know what you have, Marcus. Don't do anything you might regret." The words were direct, like a punch to the gut. He knew that Montgomery had discovered the documents that Sarah had revealed, and that they were trying their best to keep them secret. Marcus showed a letter to Sarah, who tried to hide the fear in her eyes. But he noted the concern in her voice when she said, "We need to be quick, before they take more drastic action." They knew the Montgomerys were not ones to bluff. The shadows that had been haunting Marcus' life for the last few days were now turning into an imminent storm, ready to crash down on them. He felt there was no turning back. The only way out was to move forward, using everything he had to protect himself and expose the truth. If necessary, they decided to act. Marcus held a test meeting, documenting everything Sarah had shared. He knew that if he wanted to face the Montgomerys, he would need something more solid than words. Each night, he and Sarah met in secret, presenting a dossier that could turn the tide in their favor. The adrenaline that previously came from fear was now overcome by the feeling that they were fighting for something bigger. They knew the battle would be tough, but they also felt that, for the first time, they had a chance to challenge the power that oppressed them. The first signs that the Montgomerys were reacting came quickly. The SUV appeared again, now parking ostentatiously in front of Marcus' house, as if to make it clear that he was being watched. On another night, he discovers one of the men in suits following him around town, trying to be discreet, but failing to hide his presence. Marcus knew that every move was an attempt to intimidate him, to break his resolve before he could act. But he also knew that no matter how hard they pushed, the more he was sure he was on the right path. On a cloudy afternoon, Marcus was directly confronted by Richard Montgomery, the family patriarch, who showed up unannounced at his home. His presence was like a reality check, a reminder that power games are not won with courage alone. "You're playing with fire, Marcus," Richard said, with a calm that carried an underlying threat. "My family didn't get this far by letting anyone challenge our rules. This is your last chance to recover and accept our agreement. Otherwise, things could get much worse for you and everyone you love." Marcus felt his blood boil, but he remained calm. "I am no longer a simple man who can be intimidated by words, Mr. Montgomery. If you want to give up on me, you'll have to do better than that." He knew that challenging Richard head-on might be a mistake, but he felt that it would first show that he was not willing to give in. Richard left with an icy smile on his face, as if he was sure that conversation was just the beginning of a more dangerous game. And Marcus, as he closed the door, knew that things were about to escalate to a level he never imagined. From that moment on, Marcus and Sarah intensified their preparations. They knew that if they were attacked, their only defense would be the truth they carried in their hands. Sarah was also more determined than ever to face her own father and reveal everything she knew about Montgomery's dark practices. It was a moment of overcoming for her, a way of finding courage where before there was only fear. Marcus saw a spark of determination in her eyes, and he knew that together they could withstand what was to come. But a doubt still hung over them. Would this be enough? And then the storm finally broke. One rainy night, as Marcus and Sarah were reviewing documents, they heard heavy footsteps outside. The SUV's lights illuminated the window, and then there was a loud knock on the door. The tension in the air was suffocating. Marcus opened the door and came face to face with two men, this time with a much less friendly tone than the previous ones. "You're coming with us, Marcus. No more discussion," they said, as they pulled him out. Sarah tried to interview, but was quickly restrained. Marcus knew that this was the decisive moment, the moment when all his choices would be put to the test. "You can take me, but not without the world knowing what's really going on," Marcus challenged, holding up the envelope like a trophy in the light of his glasses. The SUV, which once seemed like a symbol of intimidation, now only illuminated the truth they were trying to hide. The men stopped, hesitating for a moment, and then one of them finally spoke. "We're going to back off, but that doesn't mean it's over, Marcus. The Montgomery family does not forget anyone who defies its rules." Marcus knew this was a temporary victory, but it was the chance he needed to buy time and ensure the truth came out. When the men finally retreated to the SUV and disappeared into the darkness of the night, Marcus and Sarah lay there, panting, the rain washing away the cuts and bruises they carried. The envelope was safe, but they knew this was not the end. It was just the beginning of a much bigger battle, where each step would need to be calculated. "This isn't over, Sarah," he said, looking at her with a mix of trouble and concern. She nodded, knowing the words were true. The truth he had protected that night would now need to be used to face the Montgomerys once and for all, even if it meant risking everything he had. The storm had passed, but the war was just beginning. We have reached the end of this journey, filled with difficult choices, secrets revealed, and a drama that tested every value Marcus carried in his heart. But the big question is, what did you learn from this story? Marcus's decisions show us that, no matter how tempting the opportunities are, there is always a price to be paid. Are you prepared to deal with the consequences of your choices, even when they seem challenging? Looking at your own life, what are the dilemmas you have faced, and what has guided your decisions? Sometimes the answer is to listen to your heart, to maintain integrity even when the path seems more difficult. Other times, it takes courage to take a risk, to take a step that could change everything. So, would you take the risk? Or would you prefer to keep things as they are, knowing that security may come at the cost of unfulfilled dreams? If this story attracted you, if you reflected on the choices you have before you, then subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Let's continue learning together about how to face adversity, overcome challenges, and build a future based on courage and truth. Because in the end, what really matters is having the freedom to choose who you want to be.